There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's a pleasure today and an honor to have on Brigadier General retired John Dragon Teichert. After graduating from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Stanford University, John entered the United States Air Force as an F-15E combat pilot. He would go on to serve as an F-22 test pilot and eventually lead as the commander of Joint Base Andrews, the commander of Edwards Air Force Base, and our nation's senior defense official in Iraq. General Teichert entered his service in the Air Force as the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force, International Affairs. During his career, he logged over 2,000 flight hours in 38 different types of aircraft. General Teichert is a champion of inspirational, innovative, integrity-filled leadership. He has vast whole-of-government leadership experience from cutting-edge technology to our nation's most sensitive international relationships. John has written and spoken extensively on leadership, national security, innovation, risk management, and international affairs. He is an Amazon best-selling author and a former candidate for U.S. Senate who maintains a robust schedule of international-level media engagements. John is the founder and president of Capital Leadership, LLC, developing the leaders our nation needs and fostering a leadership style that breaks barriers, challenges convention, and ignites innovation. His activities can best be followed through johnteichert.com and LinkedIn as he continues to serve with his amazing wife Melanie and their 3 remarkable children. Well, General, welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's just an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Chief, it is a privilege for me. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. You know, General, you've had an amazing journey and an illustrious career. Could you just share with us kind of how your journey has progressed?
Well, Chief, I appreciate that. I have loved every bit of it. I served for the Air Force for 28 years, but it really starts before that. I grew up in a very small town in the northwest tip of the country, Port Angeles, Washington. Mm-hmm. And it was a patriotic home and it was a loving home. And I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with my life. But then as an 8th grade boy, I went to our single theater and watched Top Gun in spring of 1986. And I decided that is what I wanted to do with my life. I went out to go do some research on which service had the best airplanes. And at the time, the F-15E Strike Eagle was coming out. And I said, the Air Force is it. And I joined the Air Force through ROTC and loved my time as an F-15E combat pilot and an F-22 test pilot. But really in the latter half of my career, grew to absolutely love the opportunities to make an impact on people through leadership. And that's what I've been focused on ever since.
So you actually went to MIT and Stanford before you entered the military, correct?
I did. And maybe the most important part of that story is that's where I met my wonderful wife, Melanie. It was at MIT as undergrads. In fact, as 17-year-olds, when we showed up there, we were in ROTC together. And we took our first oath of office together to support and defend the Constitution of the United States as 17-year-olds. And then now we've been married for 26 years, 3 incredible kids. And so while I got an education at MIT, more importantly, I got an amazing partner in this life journey.
Well, that's the most important thing, right?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about, you after you got out of college and you entered the military, because you went from college into the military. Tell us a little bit about that process for you.
I knew as a ROTC cadet that I had been selected to go to pilot training for the Air Force. And so I got out of undergrad, went to grad school for a year at Stanford, like you mentioned, and then went to pilot training and found out, based on all of the accumulation of what I had done at pilot training at the end of that 13-month process, that I got that F-15E Strike Eagle that I had been dreaming about since being a high schooler and after watching Top Gun, and then did a couple of combat tours in the F-15E, and then applied to test pilot school, because part of this journey was that I also wanted to be a test pilot. And I got accepted and went to test pilot school. And right out of test pilot school in 2003, was able to fly as a very new aircraft, the F-22 Raptor, as a test pilot. I ended up circling back 3 different times to fly that magnificent machine. But that was when I was about in my midpoint of my career and started to have these leadership opportunities. And that's what really captured my heart as I developed then as a squadron commander, and then the commander of a couple of different bases, including Joint Base Andrews and Edwards Air Force Base, our senior defense official for our nation in Iraq. And then I ended my 28-year military career as the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs. And I retired about a year and a half ago with this firm belief that there's more of a difference that I could make outside of the military on people in our nation than inside. And I'm having a blast in the second half of my life and career, seeing exactly what that's going to be.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to delve into a little bit of that. But how did you get the moniker Dragon?
I got it in 1998. It was my first squadron. And the way at least my community does that is that you show up at your first operational squadron. Mine was at RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, the 492nd Fighter Squadron. And about 6 months in, you've accumulated enough dumb things that you've done as a young lieutenant there in a fighter squadron. And what they always tried to do was to create a cool sounding name. Dragon is about the coolest name there is, based on something stupid you did. And it's best not to share all of the gory details of why Dragon, but I'll leave it at this, that it has to do with Zaragoza, Spain, and nuclear weapons. Okay. And we'll close the chapter there.
Okay. Well, well stated. So, leadership is a really important facet of what you're doing today. And you just released a new book entitled Boom: Leadership that Breaks Barriers, Challenges Conventions, and Ignites Innovations. Can you tell us a little bit about the impetus to write that, number one, and then what's in the book?
Absolutely, Chief. I wrote it about 8 months ago. That's when it came out. It was published on Amazon. And I did it based on the fact that I was doing a lot of keynote speaking about leadership and innovation. And I realized that I'd basically, in the different speeches I had been giving, had already written the book or chapters of the book. And so I sat down and actually put it together. But it's a story about how we all hate bureaucracy. We all hate it. It slows us down. It makes things miserable. And it's a story about when I showed up to command Edwards Air Force Base, that huge test base in the Mojave Desert for the Air Force, that it was a bureaucratic quagmire. And we knew, in order to do the mission that our nation needed us to do, that we needed to turn it from that quagmire into an innovation juggernaut. And it's a story about how we use traditional leadership techniques and some flamboyant leadership techniques thrown into the mix to fundamentally change the culture of that base in about 6 months, such that we went to become something that had more innovation activity at one base of 11,000 people than the rest of the 670,000 person United States Air Force combined. And I tell that story in this book with a lot of Chuck Yeager stories. He was a friend of mine. Victoria Yeager, his widow, still is. A lot of flying stories, and how it can be applicable to leaders at all levels if they really wanted to lead well and transform organizations to become innovation juggernauts.
And so just give us a little bit of detail on the how-to.
Yeah, the fundamental part of it, Chief, is this cycle that I describe as listen, consider, and act. Because as a leader, you're not necessarily the idea guy or the idea gal. I don't find myself particularly creative. But if you have a team of 11 people or 11,000 people, and they are convinced that if they have ideas, that someone will listen to them, someone will consider their ideas, and they will act appropriately, then now you don't need to be extra creative. You're just unlocking the natural talent of the individuals in your team and unleashing the team itself. And the results we saw were magnificent. And that's a great lesson for leaders at all levels, to listen, consider, and act, and help your team to truly believe that if they have an idea, someone is listening, someone will consider it, and someone will act appropriately.
Yeah, very, very, very true. I found in running different organizations that, the people on the ground, 95% of the time have the best answers to the issue, right? And so often we never knock on their door and ask them, what would you do? How would you fix this?
It's true. And I find it interesting that once you start the cycle and you ask those questions, and then they see that you're actually doing something with what they recommended, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do exactly what they want, but you've folded that input into your ultimate decisions.
Yeah.
And the word gets out to your team that you truly are serious about listening, considering, and acting. Then the dam opens and the tsunami hits in a way that just allows you to have all of these great ideas from every corner of your organization that come flowing in, that you can ultimately roll into your decision-making process.
Yeah, that's so true. And then the speed of change in your organization just starts to ramp up. It's like that flywheel effect. And it's really fun to see.
It is. And, again, not only does it help you better achieve your mission, and we saw that with all this innovation activity, but it drastically improves quality of life because it engages your workforce in a way that they weren't otherwise engaged. And it creates this alumni network that has seen what right looks like, that then can go out and do whatever they want as citizens or human beings to make an impact far beyond just the impact in your organization.
Yeah, very, very true. Well, I know through your journey, you faced many difficult situations in your life. And has there been one or two that has really helped to shape who you've become as a leader and as a person?
Chief, the one that always pops to mind and I think about constantly was when I became a squadron commander in F-22 test. And the squadron commander is the boss of the organization, in my case, about 700 people, that was responsible for all of the F-22 development and testing for the United States Air Force. But I became commander about 4 months after we had a fatal accident in an F-22 doing test in March of 2009. On the 25th of that month, we lost a hero of mine, Dave Cooley, in a flight test accident in the F-22. And now I fleed up from being the second in charge of that organization about 4 months later to being in charge of that organization. Just that whole process was gut-wrenching. Yeah. But then I show up on my boss's front doorstep to get my initial feedback 11 days into the job. And he tells me this. He says, "Dragon, you're not the guy." And I said, "Sir, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, you're not the right person to lead this organization. I'm kind of horrified that you're now going to be the commander." And I said, "Well, sir, it sounds like you should fire me." And he said, "Well, I can't for whatever reason, but I'm stuck with you, but you're not the guy." And I kind of tried to dig a little bit of what he meant by that, and he really didn't share. It wasn't some masterful leadership technique of his. It was just him, I guess, just sharing his heart because we had had this accident and obviously some changes needed to take place in the organization. Yeah. But I remember going back to my organization and then going back home and talking to my wife, Melanie, and coming to the conclusion that my career at that point was terminal, meaning I was never going to get promoted or would progress. And that meant that as long as he kept me in that job, I had a chance to be completely selfless in my leadership persona because it was not going to be about me because I was terminal. It was going to be about leading in the right way for as long as I had until that assignment ended, and likely then my career in the Air Force would be done. And that got me, Chief, into repetition about how to lead selflessly and how to be a servant leader, because it wasn't about me, because it didn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
And for 2 years, in the gut-wrenching aftermath of that accident, I led and we served together as a team. Miraculously, out of that, I got promoted. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. He never liked me, frankly. My boss didn't. But we won awards and we accomplished the mission, and our quality of life was thriving. But what it really did for me, Chief, was that it got me the repetition of selfless servant leadership that now has carried on with me since 2009 and become a fundamental part of who I am and what my leadership persona is all about. And so while that wasn't his intent in saying what he said, it has become a core part of who I am. And to some extent, I guess I have to credit him for helping me become the type of leader that I know that my teams have needed me to be.
Well, and you probably, I'm just guessing, you outlasted him.
I did, actually, as it turned out. Here's a little bit of a story about all of that, Chief. At the end of my time, I had submitted my team in for this award of the Team of the Year for this very big organization that was well above what my boss was responsible for. And I remember him asking me, because we passed our nomination through a different area of the chain of command, because I knew he still didn't like me and wouldn't forward it up. But we won at this super high level as the Team of the Year. And I remember driving home and weeping because of all we had been through as a team after the loss of Cools, my friend and mentor, after a toxic leadership environment that didn't like me or our team in the aftermath and didn't support us. But all of it allowed us to emerge as a team that was not only award-winning, but was a family, and that I still keep in touch with. In fact, I'm going out to Southern California next month to speak, and I'm getting together with that same large organization because there's a lot of people that are still there that were there back in 2009. And it really feels like a family because we healed together and we served together. And regardless of the toxicity above us, that we achieved the mission and took care of one another, and we all grew and developed as a result.
Yeah, well, that's a great story. Great story. And I think it prepared you for, the rest of your journey. Now, you were a commander of Joint Base Andrews Edwards Air Force Base and the nation's senior defense official in Iraq. And those are all really, really big jobs. So can you tell us a little bit about each one of those? Because I think that would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, let me start with Joint Base Andrews. And I got to be the commander of the President's Airfield.
Yeah.
And I was a little surprised when I got the nod for that job. I am thrilled, certainly, that I did. But that place is the highest visibility base on the planet. And, an average base, if you have a 4-star general come to visit, you shut down for a week to prepare. And we had the president come through multiple times a week. Actually, I spanned administration. So both President Obama and President Trump were there when I was the commander at Joint Base Andrews. But that is a base of about 17,000 people that have no-fail missions like F-16s that are ready to scramble to protect our nation's capital, an air fleet that ferries around the president and the senior leaders in our nation, a bomber air refueling aircraft that are ready in case of national emergency. We have a variety of other communication tools there. And I just loved getting to know people that did all of these vitally important strategic level jobs for our nation, and to be able to be a commander there. In fact, a friend of mine is the commander there now. He took command about a month ago. I went to his change of command, and when I drive on to America's airfield, it gives me some goosebumps and some chills. So I got to do that for 2 years. And then the Air Force was kind enough to give me 8 days to drive across the country with my family before I took command of Edwards Air Force Base, which is a place that I call the center of the aerospace testing universe. Ever since Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier there in 1947, it's been at the nexus of every aerospace first for our nation. And right now, they're in the midst of modernization programs for fighters, tankers, bombers, transport, mobility aircraft, AI, weapon systems, revolutionary weapons. And I got to be, as a test pilot, essentially the senior test pilot at that base. But to some extent, Chuck Yeager called it the most important, consequential job in aerospace in the Air Force. And I loved that position there for almost 2 years. before I deployed to Iraq as our senior defense official. And talk about being on the cutting edge and the front lines of the toughest of situations. I was there during COVID. I was there in the aftermath of the killing of that Iranian General Soleimani. I was away from my family for 14 months, but really working there to build a strong American presence to achieve our national interests in the Middle East when Iranian-aligned militia groups were attacking us on a regular basis. And so that was an interesting series of back-to-back-to-back jobs. Yeah. But what made it amazing was the chance to serve my country and to do so along people that I like, respect, appreciate, and admire. And I still keep in touch with a lot of members of all of those teams because they also became like family to me, and I loved every bit of it.
Yeah, well, very, very important roles. And I think you went on to be an undersecretary, too, of the Air Force, correct?
I was the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs. Yeah. Which means all of the things that the Air Force and the Space Force do with our international partners around the world come through that office as we work for the Secretary of the Air Force. And it was magnificent to remind myself of some things I learned in Iraq, that it is a whole of government team that achieves our national security interests in any given country. And that certainly extended to all of our portfolio in the Air Force and the Space Force, about $240 billion of portfolio, as we serve alongside of our allies and partners as a unique American advantage around the world.
So I think when you were, was it at Edwards that you took on the Tower Challenge?
That was when I was at Andrews.
Yeah.
And I had an awesome group of first responders, both paramedics and defenders or cops and firefighters. And I think it was 2017. In fact, I was just texting my command chief who did that with me. And on 9/11, we drove down to Richmond with our team. And on one of those skyscrapers there in Richmond with full firefighter gear, did 4 laps up that tower to hit 110 stories. And the thing that strikes me, Chief, about that is that I was so hot and miserable at the end of that experience, but I was running in an air-conditioned stairway or walking, not really running. After 110 stories, I was struggling even to walk. But our first responders put on that gear and they go into harm's way, not knowing if they're going to come out to serve our community. And it gave me a firsthand, real perspective of the heroism of our first responders, not just on 9/11, 2001, but every single day as they serve in communities around this country. And it really gave me an appreciation for all of that.
Well, and I think it's akin to our combat folks as well. I mean, they're geared up and then they're in environments that are just really, really difficult. I don't think they really appreciate just, the impact that has on your body after a period of time. I think you came to appreciate that from a fire perspective, but yeah. And kudos to you for making it 110 stories. That in and of itself is very impressive.
Well, just like anything else, I was encouraged and motivated by the team I had around me, and hopefully I was motivational to them. Yeah. And I think I probably would have quit a quarter of the way through if I wasn't doing it alongside of people that I wanted to make sure were proud of me as I was proud of them. And so that gave me a dose of motivation that I wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Well, I know you've met a lot of great leaders in your journey. Could you share, what's some that may stand out to you and why? Chief, absolutely. I'm going to go back to one of my first squadron commanders. I told that story about how when I was a squadron commander, but I remember showing up there at RAF Lakenheath as a lieutenant and a young captain. And our squadron commander at the time was a guy named Junior Summonsby. Junior was his call sign, like mine is Dragon. And he made it a priority to make sure that we were not just good F-15E aircrew pilots and Wizzos, but we were developed into the leaders that he knew that we could be. And he was a mid-30s guy at the time as a squadron commander, and he and his director of operations, Killer Quast, and 2 flight commanders who were probably in their late 20s at the time, Ozzie Nelson and Lutz Ludwig, poured themselves into developing intentionally the leaders that they knew that we could be. And I used Junior because then fast forward to 2017, I'm the commander of Joint Base Andrews, and every single year, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force brings in all his wing commanders. there's about 250 wing commanders. Those are the ones that command a base or the mission of a base. And he brings them in for a conference, 250 combined between active duty, guard, and reserve. That's not a very big room of the people that essentially lead the United States Air Force, the mission and the people of the Air Force. And when I go to a conference, probably like most of your listeners, the first thing I do is start looking around the room for the people I know. And I discovered something, Chief, that was fascinating, that as I looked around that pretty small room, there were 7 of us from the same time under Junior Summonsby in 1997 and 1998 at RAF Lakenheath that now 20 years later were wing commanders in the United States Air Force. And it wasn't because of nepotism or cronyism. It was because a few young guys poured themselves into younger guys and gals to help them develop into leaders. And that investment 20 years later paid off in 7 of us in the same room at the same time as wing commanders in the United States Air Force. There was one additional one that became a wing commander from that time at Lakenheath that wasn't a wing commander then. So say now 8 people that were leading the Air Force and bases in the Air Force. And I go back to Junior Summonsby and the command or leadership climate that he created in intentionally pouring himself and prioritizing the development of leaders in the organization that had this massive long-term multi-generational effect across our United States Air Force. And that's just a reminder to me of the power of how all of us are the sum total of people that have invested in us. And that if we now as senior leaders are intentional and deliberate about doing the same thing as Junior did for us to others, then now we too can have enduring multi-generational types of impact.
Yeah, very, very excellent point. You know, we've all had people in our lives that have made that investment and made us better and opened doors for us. And, you know, that's the true testament to a good leader, isn't it?
It is. It's not necessarily about succeeding in the mission here and now. In fact, when I talk about my leadership philosophy, there's a standard debate amongst people about whether someone should be mission first or people first. And I understand there's good arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
But if you look at the mission as a long-range mission, then now the best way, in my case, support and defend the Constitution of the United States. The best way I can achieve that mission for the long term, such that those principles are thriving when I'm sitting on my front porch talking about the good old days as a retiree, is to invest myself in people and help them become the best possible version of themselves. And so in that way, mission first and people first converge, and they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I think if we focus on deliberately and intentionally developing the types of leaders that our nation needs, then now the mission will thrive in the short term and the long term, and will create good citizens that our nation indeed does need for the future.
Yep, totally agree. I've always called it planting the seeds of leadership.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, because that's what you kind of do. You kind of help prepare your people and you invest in them, and then you hope someday that they step up and step out and take on their own departments or wing or whatever they're doing, whatever the profession is. And if you've had some small part in helping them to do that, you know, that's the best testament to a leader that you can have.
It does. And, you know, this probably happens to you dozens of times a week, Chief. And it happens to me on occasion where I get an email or a text or a Facebook message from somebody that had served underneath me that maybe I don't even remember in big organizations like 17,000 people like Joint Base Andrews, that says, "Hey, General Retired Teichert, I just want you to know that you did X and it made a huge impact on me. And now here's what I'm doing with that small investment. I'm leading this organization, or my family is thriving, or I'm a leader or a pillar in my community." And those are the best messages to get, because it reminds us that the best things that we can do as a leader is to invest in others such that they do have this long-term, enduring, multi-generational impact, like is manifest by those messages that you get all the time and occasionally I get.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's those are special emails, aren't they?
They are indeed.
Yeah. So what's your perspective on the state of leadership in society today?
Chief, I think there's a dearth of good leaders across society. I'm not just talking about the military. I'm not just talking about politics or Washington, D.C. or government. I'm talking about people that we need to step up as leaders, frankly, have not had the type of people like Junior Summonsby investing in them. And now they don't know what right looks like because they haven't seen it, or someone hasn't deliberately instilled it in them. And my concern is that people are thirsting for good leadership. They're thirsting for it in government, in the military, in private sector, wherever they may be. They're looking for somebody that leads in a way that inspires them, that encourages them, that helps them become the best possible version that they can. But it's not going to happen by accident. It happens because leaders are intentional about investing themselves in the next generation and are showing the next generation what right looks like. And until we start developing a culture where we as leaders realize our massive responsibility to do right and to raise up right, then we're never going to see society turn around from this dearth of good leadership that we know people are thirsting for.
Yeah, and I totally agree. There's so many good leaders out there doing really great stuff, but we don't hear about them.
We don't.
And I think that we've become a society of soundbite leadership, and that's not the way you lead. You don't lead with sound bites. You lead with investment. You lead with strategic vision, and you lead with ethics and things that we hold very dear. So I think just having conversations like this with great leaders like yourself, I think bring perspective to the population about there really are some phenomenal leaders in our country. We just need to find them.
We need to find them, and we need to trumpet what they are doing from the platforms that we have so people can see what right looks like. They can be encouraged that there is right out there, and then we can find a way to intentionally bottle that up to deliver it to a society and a people that are thirsting for it.
Yeah, I agree. So what would you share with leaders today to help them be more effective in their roles, whatever they are?
There are a couple things that I like, Chief, to hammer on when I talk about my leadership philosophy, because it's okay to have a leadership philosophy, but it needs to be tethered to the people you are leading. And I know there's a bit of a discussion about whether followers today and this generation are the same as followers from the past. There's some differences that maybe we can explore, but I think that fundamentally there are two needs that are innate in humankind that leaders can uniquely fulfill. People want to be loved or cared for, and people want to be part of something that is greater than themselves. Yeah. And if you consider, how do I as a leader exercise my knowledge of those two innate human needs so that then I can apply my skill set and allocate time and resources in order to meet both of those fundamental human needs? Because I have seen that if you do meet each of those, then now you truly do unlock individual talent and unleash the power of your teams. And I truly believe that people are thirsting to have the love or genuine care and concern element fulfilled by a variety of people in their life, including a leader. And the leader needs to be intentional about communicating how what they are doing links up to something that fulfills a higher purpose in their lives. And if leaders do both of those things well, then now it really does create this amazing capability that is latent in a workforce that is looking for a leader to love or care for them and to help them be tethered to something that is more important than themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And that, there's been a lot of talk about the different generations in the workforce today and how we need to communicate differently and maybe approach each one a little different. And there's probably some truth in that. But I think what you just said is applies to all generations, because I think people want to feel like that they're working for somebody or with somebody that really cares about them and is investing in them and looking out for their well-being as well as the well-being of their organization.
I agree. And I do think there's some nuances in how you communicate to different generations in a way that resonates with them. But as I study leadership, those ideas of caring for your workforce and helping them understand that they're part of something greater than themselves go back to George Washington and Valley Forge. They go back to lessons that we see in the Holy Bible. They go back to Thucydides in ancient Greece. We see them consistently throughout human history. And while we implement them in ways that are different today because of communication tools and contexts, that those fundamental human needs, if we apply our skill set to those, to meeting those, then now the results are phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I really agree with your assessment. So for the next generation of leaders, what challenges are you seeing emerge today that they're gonna be faced with?
I think that I would go back to my original thoughts of genuine care and concern and love and communication. But as a leader, when I am trying to communicate, especially to newer, younger generations, I realize that they are extra savvy and extra smart and extra connected, which means if there is right out there, then they have seen it. And they're going to hold you and I to the standard that they either hear about or see on the various communication tools that they use, which means that you and I and leaders at all levels need to be very deliberate about how we actually adhere to the leadership principles that you and I have talked about throughout this podcast, because they're going to see if you disconnect or are askew from what you say is important to you. And you need to go out of your way to be consistent and to over communicate in a variety of ways that will reach older generations and younger generations. And the more smart and savvy and connected they are, the more you and I need to be very intentional about being the type of leader that they deserve and that they need, and communicate in a way that's going to reach all of them.
Yeah. And it's really about the leaders today really need to walk their talk.
They do. Yep. And if there's an incongruity there, then the workforce is going to notice it and seize upon it, and your credibility is going to be dashed.
Yeah, you're done.
Yep.
So what takeaways would you like to leave today that may help someone become a better leader and a better person in their journey?
Chief, I think it goes back to something that we've danced around throughout this podcast, which is a leader has this opportunity, if they fulfill their leadership responsibility right, to make this enduring, long-term, multi-generational impact on people that are all around them. And that is a great responsibility, and it's also a great privilege. And it should put a spring in our step, and it should wake us up in the morning as leaders, and it should force or prompt us to be the types of leaders consistently that our people need, because how you and I lead in the good times and the bad times is going to make an indelible impact on the scores of people who are watching. And by the way, they are watching, and they are judging what they see by what you do and what you say and how consistent and enduring it is. But you have a great impact. I have a great impact. Every one of your listeners, as a leader or budding leader, has a great opportunity to influence scores of people in a multi-generational fashion. And that should encourage us to be the types of leaders that those people need and those people deserve.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, General. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Appreciate your insight and appreciate the service to our country and the leadership that you've brought and the impact that you've made on so many people. It's probably, we probably couldn't count them, the number of leaders that you've created in your journey. But thank you for your service, and we appreciate you.
Chief, I similarly appreciate you and your service. And thanks for your continued service to our nation and our community as you help people to understand the importance of what good leadership looks like and how to apply that in our lives and our situations. Thanks for all you continue to do.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.